We're here at CRM Evolution 2015. I'm Butch Stearns of the Pulse Network, and I'm joined now by Scott Amyx. Scott, how are you?
Good, thank you, Butch. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. Tell us a little bit about you, your company, and what you do.
Okay, so real succinctly, I specialize in wearables and the Internet of Things, and travel the world speaking about leading-edge technologies that's disrupting the world. And one of the exciting things that we think is that wearables and Internet of Things is going to potentially fundamentally shift the way we think about advertising and marketing. And that's part of the reason I'm here to speak at CRM Evolution.
So before we get to the line of questioning and thoughts about CRM, let's stay on wearable technologies and let's talk about it for business. Clearly there are advantages, and it's here that companies now, organizations have the opportunity to reach consumers 24/7, reach them at the right time. What do organizations need to think about when it comes to the Internet of Things and wearables for business?
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the wearables side, it's important to understand that we have to go beyond just thinking about fitness and the tracking side. If you look at Fitbit as an example, the valuation and the analyst response has to do with the fact that they're moving beyond that, such as corporate wellness. 2016 is all going to be about how wearables are making the transition to medical grade. So that means that now they're actually doing something meaningful. It means that it's able to detect and potentially let me know in advance that I have a high probability of a heart attack, or there's a pending stroke, for instance, and be able to communicate that information to my doctors and my health professionals. So that's the real value. So it's really the data, but again, in order for the data to be accurate, there's a number of things that has to happen. So on the device side, we have to get to a point where the sensor capabilities are not just somewhat accurate, but has to be absolutely accurate. Mm-hmm. Secondly, beyond the accuracy, you have to make sure that they're applying for the FDA qualifications from a path so that they can actually be able to take this data and do something meaningful from a health and medical purpose.
So what's your advice, so to speak, to companies to sort of keep up with things and stay ahead of the curve on what's happening?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, what we recommend is that it's incredibly important to experiment. Okay. So it means that don't just think about in terms of what's happening in the mega trend, but you have to say, okay, even if it's a small dollar amount, they have to be willing to make some small R&D investment to figure out exactly how do they leverage these new emerging technology to be able to further accentuate and to amplify their core competencies. So in the case of SAP, for example, we know that you guys are strong on CRM, for example, but what we're talking about with wearables and the Internet of Things is ability to be able to actually augment that superset with additional data set, frankly, that wasn't available before. Physiological, biometric, as well as environmental sensor capabilities. We haven't talked about smart cities as an example, but now you can have residential, commercial buildings, retail store becoming alive, becoming somewhat humanized, as they have a 3D avatar personification, natural language processing, and the ability to be able to actually communicate back to you not only information about itself as a building, but what's happening inside, who's inside, what's the crowd level, what are some concerns or information that you should be aware of, for instance.
All right, let's talk CRM a little bit. I mean, the acronym has always been Customer Relationship Management. You have so many opportunities and challenges now to be able to do that in this day and age. Describe CRM in an average organization. What does it look like today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think for most organizations, it's seen as enabler for sales and marketing, clearly, right? But of course, as you're going to get to, it depends on their organizational view. The reality is that some of that's going to be fairly siloed. It's going to be very difficult to stitch together a holistic 360 customer view. So we know that. We know there's a lot of issues. Now, I'm going to just go a little bit further and say, I think the future of beyond CRM is something what I call EAI, which is the Enterprise Artificial Intelligence. The enterprise relational systems that we're talking about here today, frankly, even with all the great integration across the enterprise and third-party data sources, isn't able to do some of the things in a proactive meaning. So Artificial intelligence means, aside from just being able to apply neural networks, deep learning, cognitive science, is that the system is able to actually gather information on its own, interpret that information, be able to actually take meaningful insights and proactively actually send that to the sales force, the marketing team, so they can actually do something with that, without necessarily having for the professionals to have to spend the time to do the data analytics to figure out exactly what is the right thing so they can put together the right effective campaign for them.
You just touched on this, but what are the limitations of the modern day CRM?
Well, there's many. So, I mean, some of that is fundamental to any organization in terms of dealing with legacy content, legacy data, silo systems, right? Some of them are still very much in the old days where they haven't quite migrated over to cloud ERP systems yet. So they lack that abstraction layer where they can actually pull up the right sets of data sets to be able to have that full customer view like we talked about.
You mentioned siloed systems. How has or how should strategy change when you're an organization, when you're considering a platform system versus siloed systems?
Well, I think, and again, trying to anticipate your future questions, is that really you want to think in terms of a cloud environment. So, because you don't want to be stuck with the different sets of protocols or standards of some legacy system, but you want to be able to lift those capabilities, those data values to an abstraction layer that basically comes to the cloud. And from there, you start to have historical data, contextual data, transactional data, product data, and be able to start to put together a more fuller understanding of that customer view.
So let's talk data. You mentioned all this data that you get, wearable technologies, you're getting, real-time data, you're getting data you can be proactive with. So what are the best companies doing? How are they maximizing the insights and taking action on that data?
If you look at some of the bigger players, SAP of course, but Salesforce.com, IBM, and others, they're making strategic acquisitions, whether it's Alchemy API or Wit.ai or other types of capabilities that's further enhancing the ability to be able to recognize, look for cluster effects, and be able to understand what's happening in the big data perspective that can enable and equip Salesforce to be able to do their job more effectively. So in some cases, it means looking for who are the customer accounts or the prospect accounts you need to touch that's going to have a higher conversion rate if you do so as a result.
Single consolidated view of the customer. We know how important it is. Again, with the Internet of Things and wearables, you can, get that right away and you can be proactive with what you do with it. What are the steps that organizations should take in trying to build a single consolidated view of the customer?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I got to believe that companies already have a great baseline. The key is how do you make sure that first and foremost that you stitch all the different disparate information together to have that holistic perspective. Again, looking at it from a cloud perspective. Secondly, what the wearables and the Internet of Things does, again, it provides information, frankly, that wasn't available before. So in the case of advertising and marketing, if you look at the data sources, it's really survey and panel based. Typically in an offline manner, paper-filled or online survey questionnaire filled out. That can be quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. But even those online surveys that come after you stay at a hotel, for example, require you to fill out 10-15 minutes of questionnaire. Most people are not going to do that. What the wearables and Internet of Things is doing is providing real-time ability to be able to actually understand and detect your emotion and your reaction to a particular customer service or product or service offering. Capture that information both online but also offline, and that's the exciting part, is the offline piece that's real time that then comes back to the CRM system to give you a holistic picture of what did you do in front of the computer, but once you shut down the computer, you drove to a store, what did you actually do and what did you actually buy?
So I'm curious specifically to your answer to this question, because we've asked it to everybody, and you just mentioned it. Real-time customer information is there now, and you can use it. But in your opinion, when it comes to CRM, with real-time customer information, is that a nice to have or a need to have? Are we there yet?
I would like to say that we're here. And part of what I'm going to be speaking today is about how we have an opportunity to be able to influence people's decision making real time, online as well as offline from an omnichannel perspective. So when I go to a store, we may not fully recognize even our sense of emotional response to things, but we may look at 20 different products and we have an interaction or response immediately. What the wearables and the Internet of Things, including the environmental sensors that are placed into the retail store context, is that you can actually start to understand your context, your intent, your interest, your state of mind, your state of emotion, and how you're actually interplaying with those products and services. When we register using effective computing, neuroscience, and cognitive science, AI, we can actually send a signal to the campaign management system, to the CRM system, saying, hey, look, here's what we register. This person registered the emotion of desire for this person as an example. That means now you can actually use that as a trigger point to send a contextual, personalized message to that consumer right then and there on their phone, on their watch. That can actually have a contextual, personalized message specific to them that also potentially is accompanied by a promotion or an offer.
If people are listening to you and they're saying, well, Scott, yeah, I understand the value of real-time customer information. I understand it's there, but we're not there yet. We don't really need to be there. What's your response to them?
I think I would say look at the macroeconomic, look at the research reports. The companies, especially in the retail sectors, that are actually making the leap from a top-line growth, they're the ones that's making heavy investments into data analytics. The ones that are using advanced predictive data analytics are seeing tremendous exponential multiples on their return on investment. So this is not a nice to have, this is a must have. And the fact is, with the omni-channel, with the ubiquity of mobility, we can't afford to not grab them at that point in time because they have so many ways that they can purchase or worse, go to a competitor. You can't afford to do things the old way. You have to be on top of it. And once you recognize that they have a certain need and it's the right time, you have to trigger that and be able to influence it. I was speaking with, for example, Anthony earlier, SVP with SAP, and we're talking about how he gave the example of a car purchase. And it's all about a tipping point. You can try to understand what is their willingness and what do they need to be able to get you to purchase that product and service. And that's the kind of intelligence that we're talking about when it comes to wearables and IoT.
When I do say beyond CRM, what does that mean to you? What should it mean to people?
Yeah, so a couple of the conferences that I spoke earlier in the year talked about how we're basically moving to, like I said before, enterprise artificial intelligence. What that means is when I have a meeting in a conference room setting, that conference room setting has certain capabilities beyond what we typically think of Cisco conferencing. So that means that if I'm the salesperson, okay, I can actually start to understand not only what they're telling me, but what they actually mean. Because I don't know about you, but perhaps you've gone to a sales meeting and you think, that was a fantastic meeting, and we're going to get this account. And then weeks go by, person never responds back to you, and you wonder, what the heck happened, right? What we're saying is, the environmental wearables can start to really understand fundamentally if we sense incongruence between what you said versus what you're actually feeling. Body language, 55% of our communication, our tone of voice and the actual word spoken is very small. So if you can pick up on the body language, your facial gesture, your voice analysis, we can start to understand what you really mean. Actually, we're actually applying this in financial advice, which is very interesting. Or we're actually creating technology around this as well. So in the case of delivering advice, you want to know if that other person who's receiving it on the client side trusts you. And if I recommend 3 to 5 recommendations, which one are you actually gravitating towards versus the ones that you actually don't want to hear about? That's important.
What is your definition of contextual marketing and why is it so important?
Well, contextual, first and foremost, is going beyond just personalized information. You have to think in terms of this omni-channel. The notion that I have a tablet, that I have a mobile phone, that I have laptops, and I have Apple TV, and that there's digital signage that I'm interacting in a retail context. So it has to understand that there is a singular, unified messaging that understands, again, where I am, what's my context, what am I trying to do, what's my interest level, state of mind and state of emotion, and being able to send a message that's going to resonate with me at that point in time, just that point in time. So it's more than just saying, hey Scott, I think you'll really like this product, but it's more like, hey Scott, we noticed that you've been looking at that pair of shoes for the last 10 minutes, and you've tried it on, you've taken it off, you tried some other shoes, but you came back to it again. And we sense that you really want that. Is that right? You really want that? Oh yeah, how did they know that? Wow. So now all of a sudden there's a surprise and delight factor. Moreover, I get this message that says, hey Scott, because I noticed that emotion has unlocked this, we're going to actually offer you a 10% off in addition to what you can get at the store. Like, that's exactly what I needed to be able to have that tipping point into that purchase that perhaps I was a little bit on the fence about.
When it comes to personalized customer engagement, if you surveyed most companies, what percentage of them are doing it right, are taking advantage of it, are doing what you just explained, in your opinion?
Well, I think many are trying, but I don't think many have really considered what they can do with wearables and Internet of Things. And that's exactly what I'm trying to highlight in particular. Because let's talk about digital signage as an example. When you go to a store, there's signage or messaging. The messaging is fairly generic and isn't going to necessarily resonate with everybody that's going to come to that store. But what if we can actually capture physiological information that you give us permission to, environmental, vibration, beacon technology, facial recognition, voice analysis, and we basically start to understand what you actually like, what do you actually favor? What is that emotion? Love, passion, desire, whatever it is, that then triggers that message. Not only do you get that on your watch and your smartphone, it also synchronizes with the digital signage, perhaps near you or at the POS. Now it actually makes all sense. Wow, this is an experience that's just tailored for me, no one else. So what does that mean? It means that it's going to translate into higher conversion, higher same-store sales, higher customer loyalty and retention. So from an entire brand engagement life cycle, you've actually been able to basically optimize at every phase, every stage of that process, so that at the end of it, you have a higher customer service satisfaction.
And again, percentage-wise, you think it's 1 out of 4 companies that's doing that right now? Less, more?
It's hard to say, but I would say that they're trying, but doing it effectively, a very small percentage.
Great, thanks, Scott. That was really
Thank you,
good.
Butch. Appreciate it.